Hey, everybody. I'm David G. I'm an alcoholic and addict, and really grateful to be here with you guys. Grateful to be sober today. Happy Valentine's Day to everybody. That's not always a day that many of us could be sober, any day, but especially this day. So grateful for Recovery Day in the program of August 8th of 94. Been sober a long time from drugs and alcohol, and been sober a little while now from lust and acting out. So I'm truly grateful. I always like this chapter real well. You know, there's so much good stuff in here. It's just so in-depth whenever you slow it down and really study it versus read it. My friend Dennis had pointed out last week, and it's something that we look at with a lot of the guys that we read through this with, which in my experience, especially in other fellowships, isn't too often, because getting all the way through the book sometimes is easier said than done. There's a lot of work to be done between there and here, and we don't come here first. You know, we start down there. So, but we've been looking at the 4 different types of alcoholics, as the book talks about, and it's given us some really good principles that to live by if we can. And you know, it says there's some things that we should do and there's some things that we shouldn't do. And to make our road a lot smoother is these suggestions always well worth the effort and the time that we put into it. So I was very grateful for the day that my wife stopped letting me dictate how I was going to act and how she was going to react. But I was even more grateful for the day that I could do that with her after I'd been in recovery for a while. I was very shameful and very guilty of the things that I'd done and been exposed for in 2019. And I tried every way in the world that I knew how to make amends for that. And, you know, I continued to do that on and on. I was very blessed because she wasn't one that every time that a fight came up or a situation come up that was brought back to serve. That was just never the case. But in a roundabout way, sometimes, you know, it would come out, well, you know, this or that. And I can remember one day just stopping. See, I was sponsored by Charlie early on, from Joe and Charlie. And I can remember one of the things that he'd said is that's something you're going to have to take up with God, because I've made my amends as best I can. We've paid the electric bill for this month, so to speak. Now, we may pay it in the months to come, but we're never paying this one again. We're done. And I can remember having that talk and not knowing how that was going to turn out. It turned out better than I ever could have. And I think the biggest reason is because of the way I come at it. I didn't come at it with a attitude of judgment and revenge. And, you know, I've done all this stuff. So I did exactly what it says on the top of page 111. See, this was talking about her, but this is also talking about me. The first principle of success is that you should never be angry. Try that with your kids sometimes. That's not always an easy thing to do. But even when making amends, one of the first principles of success is that I'm not going to come into that, even if it gets heated. I'm not going to turn to anger. And that's huge for me, because that was always my go-to. It just always was. And I played all these little mind games around all of that stuff. Or I would do the silent scorn. You know, it just doesn't make for very peaceful times. So that kind of atmosphere no longer exists, and I'm so grateful for it, because emotional recovery here really is the most important thing that we're after, or that I'm after for sure. So the book has been very specific on this. I don't know what's going on. I do know they're not coming for me, so we're in good shape tonight. And so let's pick up on page 112, and we're going to go right there, first full paragraph, which would be the short one, where he says he probably has several alcoholics among his own acquaintances. And today in recovery, I guarantee you most of us, we have that. You might suggest that you both take an interest in them. Now, that hasn't always been the case here, and rightfully so. I mean, I love working with drunks and all of that, but as a rule, you know, we don't do it together anymore. Drinkers like to help other drinkers. There's a promise. That is a promise. Your husband may be willing to talk to one of them. If this kind of approach does not catch your husband's interest, it may be best to drop the subject. But after a friendly talk, your husband will usually revive the topic himself. This may take patient waiting. but it'll be worth it. And obviously, we're still talking about the man who is still what they would call wet here. Meanwhile, you might try to help the wife of another serious drinker. And I think that's another one of the principles of the goodies that we're digging out of these chapters. I had a guy that called me today. He's a new guy that I picked up and started sponsoring. And, he's still new. He's not really familiar with the disciplines of 10 and 11 the way we do them, but he's catching on. And by the end of the day today, he had really caught on to it. And he was going with it. And he reached out to me and he said, I'm really feeling very lonely. And he said, it's really bothered me. He started going to this big story about it. I just shut it down. I said, why don't you reach out to one of the guys you go to meetings with that's struggling and offer him some encouragement, say a prayer with him, and come back and talk to me again. He come back in a little bit and he was like, I don't feel like that anymore. I said, that's probably a pretty good idea. You keep doing that. And so that's kind of what it's saying to us here. It may take patient waiting. That's not only with your husband, whoever you're working with or whatever, but it'll be worth it. Meanwhile, you might try to help the wife or whoever of another serious drinker. If you act upon these principles, if we take action based on spirit rather than on self upon these principles, look at this promise. He may stop or moderate. He may not, but nevertheless, our emotional life is going to be so much better because of that. Suppose, however, that your husband fits the description of number 2. The same principles which applied to number 1 should be practiced. And if you remember, back over with number 1 on page 108 at the bottom, said he may only be a heavy drinker. He may be constant. Perhaps he spends too much money. It may be slowing him up. He's a source of embarrassment. You're positive he can't handle his liquor. It does him no harm. He'd probably be insulted if he were called the world's fool. Some will stop or moderate altogether. Some will not. And of those who keep on, a good number will become true, either alcoholics or sexaholics. That's a promise. And I never looked at that in the book. But when my son was going through heroin addiction, I can remember looking at number 1 here and just really thinking, at some point, he is definitely going to become the real thing. And he has no choice but to quit or die. And that's pretty hard. So the principle there for me is to not let that become a source of embarrassment to me. It's not my fault because he is the one with the illness here. He's sick, just like I was. And so the principle for me there is to be kind and loving, not to be judgmental. And that was very hard for me. But through the grace of Al-Anon and a very dear lady that had helped me so much in that fellowship, who is now on her deathbed. In fact, I sent her a message the other day and I just got the most unique response. It was just, she's very, very sick. And she reached back and said, I just love you and the man that you've become. And she said, the program has helped me so much in my life. And she's about to die. And she said, it's the next right thing. And I thought, wow, how could you say something like that on your deathbed, But that's the kind of grace and dignity that I hope I have as well. And so we drop to the bottom, second full paragraph on the bottom of 112 there. And I think that's where we were at. Suppose, however, he fits the description number 2, those same principles will be applied and should be practiced. But, and this always changes the entire paragraph after his next bench, asking if he'd really like to get over drinking or acting out for good. I do this with some of the guys I sponsor, but not a lot. I mean, either we're in or we're out. And people tell me all the time, I've been in and out of the program for years. You'll hear that in a lot of meetings. I was taught early on that people come in and out of the fellowship many years. I've known hundreds of thousands through the years, but I've never seen too many come in and out of the program because the program is the 12 steps as outlined in the big book. And it's very few that get a hold of that ever go back. So anyway, let's pick up on 113. If he is enthusiastic, your cooperation will mean a great deal. If he's lukewarm or thinks that he is not an alcoholic, we suggest you leave him alone. Avoid urging him to follow our program. This goes for my sponsees too. I really do. If he is lukewarm or he's not interested in this, We suggest you leave him alone. And my experience was always to call him, hey, what can I do to help you? What can I do to encourage you? What can I, you show up with half of an inventory. You don't do this. You won't do that. The book says right here, we suggest you leave them alone. Now, I know they're talking about the husband, but this same principle applies to every area of my life, and the big area of my life are the guys that I work with. Here's why. The seed has been planted in his mind. He knows that thousands of men, much like himself, have recovered. Not recovering, they have recovered from a hopeless state of mind and body, which is self. Don't remind him of this after he's been drinking or acted out, for he might be angry. Now, he might be, but remember on 111, the first principle of success for us is not to be that way. Sooner or later, you're likely to find him reading the book once more, if he ever read it to begin with. But a lot of the guys that I've worked with, and most of them are husbands, they'll come to me and say, hey, I've read that book. But what they don't realize is the mindset that they were in when they read the book. If I come in with a sick mind and read the book with a sick mind, I'm not going to get a very good response from that. But if I sit down with somebody who has been through this process, they have worked the 12 steps, had a spiritual experience, and are living these principles in these back chapters in these areas of their life, they have been relieved of the bondage of self. They're no longer acting out, drinking or drugging. Then I have a much better chance of recovering myself. And that was definitely my story, because when I came back in 2019, I had been reading the book all those years with some of the best of men. So it was very hard for me to sit down and let somebody read the book to me, but that was the best thing that I'd ever done, because what happened to me is what it says right here. You're likely to find him reading the book once more. And I began to look at it in a much different light. It was almost as if the veil had been lifted. Self had been removed. And for the first time, I could see this book in a way that I'd never seen it in 25 years at that time. So it's definitely helpful. So it says, wait until repeated stumbling convinces him that he must act. For the more you hurry him, and the longer his recovery may be delayed. I don't really try to run a man through the book anymore the way that I used to do it. I used to just try to go, and I don't really do that so much anymore. I like to slow down. I really like to look at this, cross-reference it back to different places. I like to identify self. I like to look at its manifestations and how that comes at us. It's been very successful to do that. If you have a husband, number 3, you may be in luck. Being certain he wants to stop. That certainty is sometimes hard to, that's hard to know, because we're such actors at times. You can go to him with this volume as joyously as though you had struck oil. He may not share your enthusiasm, but he's practically sure to read the book, and he may go for the program at once. Now, I've seen this work good and bad. I had a young guy. I'm not going to talk much about him or his profession or any of that, but he was a very, very smart man. And man, he took to this book, and he started doing 10 and 11. We went through this process, and as much as I could feed him, he would take it. And I just thought, man, this is wonderful. This is wonderful. And I just kept doing that and doing that and doing that with him. Got him all the way to inventory. He'd done his third step. He'd done that. He'd done this. He got all the way to his amends. He started making his amends. And this was pretty quick. So I said, we need to really start looking at the back chapters of the book, because these are the areas after the spiritual experience. And if we don't look at these, the chances are self is going to come back to see you once more. He said, no, I really don't think I need that. He said, I'm ready to go back to work into my profession and do the things that I do, and I'll just catch up. I'll just read them myself. And so really at that point, after we get through amends, I don't push that toward anybody. So anyway, he did take that journey by himself, and it wasn't just a few months. He'd slacked up on amends. He really wasn't doing 10 and 11 the way that he should. And long story short, the outcome. He ended up falling out and has never been able to come back again. So it says, if he does not, you probably won't have long to wait. Again, you should not crowd him. There's another principle. Let him decide for himself. Cheerfully see him through sprees. That's hard for me to do with people there. It just is. Talk about his condition or this book only when he raises the issue. That's one that I'm not very successful at doing. Because when I talk to a guy, it's absolutely about this. In some cases, it may be better to let someone outside the family present the book. They can urge action without arousing hostility. If your husband is otherwise a normal individual, your chances are good at this stage. That's a great promise. But notice the principles. It keeps bringing us back to these principles over and over. You would suppose that men in the fourth classification would be quite hopeless. This is probably the man out of all of them that I'm going to have the most hope for, in my experience, is this number 4. And here's why. It says, because that is not so. Many of alcoholics were like that. Everybody had given them up. That's exactly where I was at in 2019. Everybody had given me up except one person. And the one person I hurt the most. But it's not so. It says, defeat seemed certain. It always does when self is in our ear. It's not only in my ear, it's in her ear. It's telling him, he's defeated, he's hopeless, he's never going to recover. We went to my very first SA meeting was in Tulsa, Oklahoma. And I had got a hold of a man that had 25 years of sobriety, and he told me what I needed to do. And in SA, they write a first step. They write it out. And so, reluctantly, I did that. I'd never done it this way, but, I was in no position to bargain or barter for anything. So I went ahead and did it. And so my wife drove me up, and we get up there that day, and it's cold. It's cold outside. And I go up to the door, and there's nobody there at the meeting. And I'll never forget this. So some guy finally comes around, and, I turn around to go back to get warm in the car, and all I can see is the taillight. She's gone, and she's meeting the guys that has 25 years. She's meeting with his wife to sit down at a nearby McDonald's and have a chat while I go to this meeting and read my first step to the group. And so what happened was she told my wife that day, she said, sexaholics never recover. And what a hell of a thing to tell somebody that has just went through the most horrific experience of their life, And this lady had many years in the S-Anon program. And she said they just never recover. They get better, but they never recover. Well, thankfully, she had been in 12-step fellowships and program herself for over 20 years, so she knew better. And I loved her response was, I'm not sure how big your God is, but ours is bigger than that. And I've seen this man recover from alcoholism in a way that was absolutely the craziest person I ever met. And anyway, long story short is we do recover here. We do recover here. And, thank God. But for anybody to tell anybody that with that much time is crazy. And that goes right along with the sentence we read. Many alcoholics, sexaholics were like that. Everybody giving them up. Defeat seemed certain. Yet often, not once in a while, not here and there, such men had spectacular and powerful recoveries. There's a lot of them on this meeting tonight that's here. But there are exceptions. Some men have been so impaired by alcohol, and I see this a lot with lust, that they cannot stop. I had a guy call me the other day. He's like, I just cannot stop. What do I got to do to stop? I was like, man, the good news is you don't have to stop the rest of your life. All you need to do is stop for the rest of the day. And then we'll look at tomorrow. And I think that really gave him enough hope to at least see that, you're going to have to corral that beast somehow. But some of us have been so impaired that we can't. And I can relate to that. Sometimes it says there are cases where alcoholism, sexaholism is complicated by other disorders. And we know bipolar is a big one. We know that depression, we know that sadness, we know all of that stuff that comes along with this. I call them soldiers of self. All of these demons, it's just all over us. So a good doctor or psychiatrist can tell you whether these complications are serious. In any event, try to have your husband read the book. And it keeps coming back to this. Read the book, or get him with somebody who can help him to read the book. His reaction may be one of enthusiasm. It may be right the opposite, too. It may be one of anger. I know it would probably be for me. If he's already committed to an institution, but can convince you, your doctor that he means business, give him the chance to try our method unless the doctor thinks his mental condition is too abnormal or dangerous. Now, this was a lot different in the 30s. We know that. This is what they did. They just locked us up and we stayed there. But today, thankfully, most of our institutions are found in the rooms. And so, but I like this promise. We make this recommendation with some confidence. For years, we've been working with alcoholics committed to institutions. Look at this beautiful, beautiful bird's eye view of what God does in the life of men like us when our mind is pickled and we're to the point of death. Since the book was first published, and we're not talking about the fellowship. I love it. We've talked about this all the way through 114 pages now. Got to have it. Can't be without it. But we're talking about the program as outlined in the book. When it was first published, AA has released thousands of alcoholics, sexaholics, whatever, from asylums and hospitals of every kind. The majority have never returned. The power of God goes deep. What a beautiful, beautiful bird's eye view of what that looks like there. Some of the best men I know was in a wet brain condition whenever they came to Alcoholics Anonymous. And today they're some of the most powerful members that fellowship has. I hear them speak all over the place. Well, the book says you may have the reverse situation on your hands, and that's most likely probably going to be the case. Perhaps you have a husband who is at large. Anybody a runner in here whenever they get to drinking? Other than me. Yeah, I like to run all over the place. He should be committed. Some of these men cannot or will not get over alcoholism. Remember, it talked about this all the way back over there whenever we started into how it works on page 58. If you want to hold your place right there for just a second and travel with me back over there. Everybody knows this well-known passage here in the book, but look at what this says. Rarely have we seen a person fail who has thoroughly followed our path. Now, it's going to talk about two kinds of people right here in these next couple of sentences that are going to die within our fellowship. Those who do not recover. And if we do not recover here, there's only one other option. We die. There's two classes of people. There's those that cannot, and there's those that will not. Completely, not just a little bit, completely give themselves to this simple program as it's outlined in the book. So there's two kinds of people that are probably going to die within our fellowship, and they're found in that class there. I cannot make a meeting every day. I cannot meet with the sponsor all the time. I can't do this. I can't do that. I won't do this. I can't. Now, we know that the wet brain, some of them cannot, and most of them definitely will not ever be able to completely give themselves to this, but not everybody's in that condition. So there again, the power of God goes very deep here. When they become too dangerous, we think the kind thing to do is lock them up. That's a pretty strong suggestion from a bunch of alcoholics who wrote a book. But of course, a good doctor should always be consulted. The wives and children of such men suffer horribly, but not more than the men themselves. And a lot of times I think we forget about the men, especially when it comes to children, because I've seen a lot of crazy situations with children through the years and wives. But I know a lot of the men, nobody feels more guilty and remorseful and shameful for the things that we've done to our loved ones than we do. We just don't. I know my poor wife never deserved any of the things that self manifesting through me brought into our life. But today I can look back as it being one of the best things that ever happened. So, but the book says this: sometimes you must start a life anew. That's a hard thing to do. We know women who have done it. Here's a condition. If such women adopt a spiritual way of life, their road will be smoother. That's not a suggestion. That's a promise. That's absolutely the truth. If your husband is a drinker, you probably worry over what other people are thinking and hate to meet with your friends. Anybody ever like that? Anybody ever make excuses for your husband or for your wife and they're drinking and this and that? I know that my wife would always call my boss and tell him, hey, he's sick today, when the truth was I was laid up drunk. And they all knew it anyway. But just the embarrassment. I mean, she didn't want to go out with me anywhere to a restaurant. I mean, I was just so rude. And so anytime that I see that, if your husband is a drinker, you probably worry, there's fear, over what other people are thinking See, that's self. What others are thinking of me, and you hate to meet your friends. You draw more and more into, if I take that word you're off of that word and just say self, you draw more and more into self. And you think there's the key words, everyone is talking about the conditions at your home. I promise you, that's probably no more the truth than anything. A lot of people just don't go around talking about the conditions of my home unless, it's something that's affected them. But this is the way that this is what it tells me. So it says you avoid the subject of drinking, even with your own parents. You do not know what to tell the children. When your husband is bad, you become a trembling recluse. Look at that fear. That's the fear that all of the actions based on self, that's what that looks like, that trembling recluse, wishing the telephone had never been invented. There's that fantasy that, oh my God, I just wish and pray. And so we find that most of this embarrassment, this self-centeredness, we should say, it's unnecessary. While you need not to discuss your husband at length, and I try to get this across to the people that I work with, you don't have to discuss at length everything you've ever done. I'll go to meetings at time and listen to people sit in there and share about themselves, and I'm like, man, you're crazy. The jury's still out on this deal. The statute of limitations on some of this stuff's not over yet. It's not a good idea to be doing that. And I try to look at this all around, not just discussing this with your husband at length, but discussing this with anybody at length other than a sponsor who I completely trust. It says you can quietly let your friends know the nature of the illness. I don't have to talk about, my son's heroin addiction and how he was out in the alley and all the stuff that he was doing there. I just need to let him know, drugs does not agree with him. He doesn't seem to believe that for some reason. So he's making some practices of that, and he's still getting his butt kicked pretty regular. And when I talk to him like that, I don't have to go into a big story about any of that stuff. That the ego, the mind, the self always wants to go into a story. It's either better than or it's worse than. Rarely is it ever the truth. There was a guy that said to me one time, he said, there's three things about what's happened in your life. One is probably not true. And I was like, bullshit. Yeah, it was true. It absolutely was true. And he said, not the way that you're telling it. And he said, two of these things you can do, one you cannot. One, you need to quit telling those stories. Two, you need to realize that you're the author of the story. Self. Take your away from that. Self is the author of this story. You're acting the part and you're out here telling all this stuff. You can change those. You can stop doing that. But on the third one, only God can change. You need to ask God to show you how to create a new story. And that became my prayer after he told me that. I started praying that. God, show me how to create a new story within me. And all of a sudden, the narrative began to lift. I didn't have to talk about all of the craziness and all of the things that I did and didn't do. I try to stay away from that. In fact, the guys that I work with, and some of them are on the call tonight, they will tell you that whenever they call me up, we start going into a story, I just derail that. Quit, get away from it, because it's just not, I don't want to hear any of that. Let's talk about the solution to that story. There's only one story I'm interested in, and that's the story of how many thousand men and women have recovered through the big book, Alcoholics Anonymous. That's the story I'm interested in. So I know that sometimes that stuff needs to be dumped, but a good therapist would be a good one for that, is from what I see. So, the same, what's it say? When you've carefully explained to such people that he is a sick person, if you're able to carefully explain, self doesn't always do that, you will have created a new atmosphere. That's what I'm looking to do in the rooms that I go to. Barriers which have sprung up between you and your friends will disappear with the growth of sympathetic understanding. You will no longer be self-conscious. Look at that small s there. I will no longer be conscious of self. I'm grateful for that. I'm grateful that I am conscious of it. I'm just grateful that I'm not consciously taking action based on self today. or feel. There's the next key word with self. Remember, attitudes, ideas, feelings, concepts. You will no longer be self-conscious or feel that you must apologize as though your husband was a weak character. What a great promise. This is what recovery, this is what the spiritual experience does for us, is what that's describing right there. He may be anything but that. Your new courage, good nature, and lack of self with small s, consciousness, will do wonders for you socially. People attract to us. Of course they do. The same principle applies in dealing with the children. Unless they actually need protection from their father, it's best not to take sides in any argument he is having with them while he's drinking. That's a very hard thing to do, because as drunks, we say some pretty nasty things to a lot of people, especially those closest to us. And what I found out, I don't do that because I hate them. I do it because self tells me they're easy targets, and I can do that. And I do, and I don't like that. So unless they need protection from their father, it's best not to take sides. That's easier said than done. But use your energies to promote a better understanding all around. So if you remember at the end of chapter 6, and we'll just take a gander over there real quick, page 88. It says this, is talking at, well, the bottom of 87. We're no longer running the show, humbly saying to ourselves many times each day, thy will be done. Then we are in much less danger of excitement, fear, anger, worry, self-pity, foolish decision. We become more efficient. We don't tire out so easily. You can't wear me out as an active drunk whenever I've had this experience outlined in this book with a step, and I've been released from the bondage of self. I don't care how close you are to me. You can't wear me out. You just can't, because I'm not burning my energy up based on actions taken by self. The actions that I'm taking now are based on spirit, and that's going to apply all around. So whether the person in my life gets better or not, the goal here for me too is for me to. I hope they do, but I learned a long time ago, I'm not going to wait around for somebody else whenever it comes to walking the spiritual path. You're welcome to come. Anybody that gets in the way of that is going to have to go. It's just the way it is. It doesn't matter who they are. So use your energies to promote a better understanding all around. Then that terrible tension, that fear, that fear that just grips us right in the gut and the throat, which grips the home of every problem drinker, will be lessened. And that doesn't matter if he's drinking or not. Frequently, we have felt obliged, look at that word, felt, to tell your husband's employers and his friends that he was sick. Was that a matter of fact, he was tight, he was drunk, or whatever. Avoid these injuries as much as you can. We want to stay away from that, because if you do that for me, I promise you, I'm not going to learn any lesson from it, and I'm going to continue to do it and expect you to bail me out. That's just how it is. Whenever possible, let your husband explain your desire to protect him. There's that Al-Anonism. There's that wanting to protect. And man, I go through some of that myself with some of the people that I'm close to. Your desire to protect him should not cause you to lie to people. But see, I don't think it's your desire to protect him. I think it's self's desire to protect. And that's what's causing the lie. The moral inventory, which the word moral, of course, means truth, but the book, and that's on page 64. If you want to take a gander at that real quick, holding your place right there. It talks about it right there. What is that? The second. Well, let's just go to where it says, therefore we start on a personal inventory. This is 4. A business that takes no regular inventory usually goes broke. There's a promise. For us, regular inventory is step 10. A commercial inventory is a fact finding. Now, if I'm going to find the facts, I must search for them. So there's the searching. And a fact facing, if I'm going to face the facts, it must be fearless. We've overcome fear in step 3. Enough to get started in this process. It's an effort to discover the truth. The truth about what? The truth about the lie. And that's exactly what it was talking about over here. The desire to lie is not going to be there anymore because I don't need to do that. I don't need to protect somebody from the truth with a lie. That just doesn't even make sense to me today. So it's an effort to discover the truth. And if you look up the word truth, it just means moral. So in those three words, you find searching, fearless, and moral. That's where the searching, fearless, and moral inventory comes from. But it's an effort to discover the truth about the lie. And that's exactly what we're reading back over here. So frequently there on the last paragraph, you have felt obliged to tell your husbands, avoiding these injuries as much as you can. Let him do it himself. Discuss with him when he is sober and in good spirits. Ask him what you should do if he places you in such a position again. Now, the answer at that time will probably be, I'll take care of it. Don't worry about it. But I think whatever condition is made there is what needs to be stuck to. Be careful not to be resentful about the last time he did so, because that's that cycle of self over and over and over. There's another paralyzing fear. See, self is still coming in here because these are the soldiers of it. These are the manifestations of self, the lying, the resentfulness, the paralyzing fear. You may be afraid that your husband will lose his position. That's a definite fear. But there have been times when I've absolutely had so much trust in God that I didn't care what happened to my position because I knew I was going to be taken care of. And when I'm in that place, nothing really bothers me anyway. So that's very much a fear that someone will lose their position. You are thinking, there's the key, there's self, of the disgrace and the hard times which will befall you and your children. See, we don't see anything about God there. That's probably why that fear is there. This experience may come to you, or it may have already had several times. A lot of times the fears that I have are based on fears that I've had in the past. And I'm afraid of doing something because I'm afraid of what is going to happen to me again. I know for the longest time I had that because of the way that I was discovered, the way that all went down. It was hard to go to a meeting and talk or to get close to anybody because I felt like I was going to be judged. And that's all it was. It was just a feeling. It's that narrative that is given to us by self that tells us all these stories of what's going to happen and not happen and this and that. So my sponsor says it like this. He says, you have to quit suffering from things that haven't happened to you yet. And I promise you, he was dead on with that, because my mind will sit around and think about losing my job, losing my wife, losing my family, getting fat, doing this, doing that. None of that's happened. And so it's just insane how the mind works. So should it happen again, regard it in a different light. This is that different view. This is that different outlook. Maybe it'll prove a blessing. Now, it's hard to believe that a man that would lose his job, it would prove a blessing. I worked in the oil and gas industry for many years and made well over six figures for a long, long time. One of the best things that ever happened to me was to lose that and get away from that. It really was. Because I tell you, that's dangerous for a lot of people like us for sure. It may prove a blessing. And in fact, it did. It may convince your husband that he wants to stop drinking or whatever else he is doing forever. It may not. And now that you know that he can stop if he will. And for you to know that, that's the greatest piece of knowledge that we can have. It's not when he stops, it's if he'll stop. Time after time, this apparent calamity has been a boon to us, for it opened up a path. Look at this beautiful promise right here, which led to the discovery of God. And that's exactly what happened in my life and many years. We've elsewhere remarked how much better life is when lived on a spiritual plane. We go through this process. We have a spiritual awakening. We get our butt kicked by self pretty hard up through those first 4 or 5 steps. But whenever we move out of that 4th step and we get into that 5th step and we really begin to see the truth, the veil is starting to be lifted. We're bringing these things to God. We're turning it over. We're setting out to make amends. We're living in 10 and 11. We are living on a spiritual plane. How much better life is when lived on a spiritual plane. If God can solve the age-old riddle of alcoholism, sexaholism, He can solve your problems too, and no matter what that may be. And I love this. Look at this. We wives have found, like everybody else, not just a few. See, self wants to tell me, no, nobody else lives like this. It's just no, everybody that is in a diseased atmosphere, everybody lives like this. Look at what they said. We were afflicted with pride. Here's self. Here's all these soldiers. We're afflicted with pride, self-pity, there's that small s, vanity, and all the things that go to make up the self-centered person. That's the makeup. That's what self does. It makes that person. And for me, these are the actions based on self. This is what that looks like in my life. And many of us can relate to that here. So we were not above selfishness or dishonesty. Now, of course, my wife never talked to me that way, or any of the other two that I ever had. They never talked a whole lot about their selfishness and dishonesty. We talked a whole lot about mine, quite often, actually. And as our husbands begin to apply spiritual principles in their life, we begin to see the desirability of doing so too. And when that comes together, man, that's a beautiful relationship. I've experienced that firsthand, and it's a beautiful thing. At first, now this wasn't as time went on, but at first, some of us did not believe we needed this help. Why would we not believe something like that? I'm sitting here watching a miracle right in front of my eyes take place, but I really don't believe I need that kind of help. We thought, key words right there, on the whole, that we were pretty good women, and probably were, but though that still there's that disconnect. Capable of being nicer if our husbands stop drinking. Wow. We kind of make them our higher power, don't we? I'll be a whole lot nicer if you'll quit doing this. I had a friend that I was sponsoring one time. Their partner told them this: I can recover if he's not your sponsor. And I can remember saying, anytime that I hear that from anybody, it's time for that person to go, because if you're putting conditions on your recovery based on who the sponsor may or may not be, you're not serious about recovery to begin with. So here's a good sentence for that. It was a silly idea to say that we were too good to need God. And that's exactly in a roundabout way what we're saying. So now we try to put spiritual principles to work in every department of our lives. And that's what we're doing now. It really is. All of our affairs is the way the book words it. When we do that, not if, when, we find it solves our problems too, whether you're drinking or not. Our problems too, the ensuing lack of fear. Look at that promise. Worry, hurt feelings is a wonderful thing. We're free of the bondage of self. We urge you to try our program, for nothing will be so helpful to you and your husband as the radically changed attitude toward him, which God will show you how to have. Go along with him if you possibly can. Well, we're hoping next week, I'm pretty sure that we will move out of this chapter and we'll begin to move on. We're moving on toward the end of it. And I'm excited for it. I appreciate you guys coming out on Valentine's Day. This is a good day to be sober for any of us. But I'm really grateful to be here tonight with all of you. And I love this chapter. It's good, solid study. And some of these things are hard to do, but we know that with God, nothing's impossible. So this is a good one. I appreciate it. Thanks, Ash, for your service. Dennis, you as well. Thank you, guys.
This concludes David's share on tonight's chapter, but we encourage you to keep listening as he answers questions from the audience and shares additional experience, strength, and hope.
There was something that we received anonymously in the chat that I just wanted to comment on, that they don't feel ashamed and feel very comfortable in this meeting, having dual addictions. And so, David, I don't know if you just wanted to speak to a moment about this being not a SA or an AA meeting, but just an all addiction study.
Absolutely. Thanks so much, Ash. And I'm glad whoever posted that is here. This is absolutely a study for all addictions. That was the primary goal of coming into this to begin with, because we have learned that these spiritual principles work in all areas of life for any addiction, because the addiction, as we have said so many times, that's the effect. That's not the cause. For so long, I thought that was the cause of my condition. but it's very, very clear that self is the cause of our all addictions, and so therefore recovery from. I've worked this book with many people in the last 3 years of all kinds of addictions: overeating, sex, lust, alcohol, drugs, you name it. The same principles apply here that apply to every addiction. So you're most definitely in the right place. There are pages that and quotes out of this book that we could read by the thousands, but I'm just going to read one. And we're going to do that on page 42. So if you want to take a quick gander back over there, this is a story about a man named Fred. Fred wouldn't believe himself an alcoholic. He wouldn't accept the first step. He wouldn't do any of this. He wouldn't do any of that. Well, trust me, self has a way of beating you into a position where you're going to do something one way or the other. But after Fred came in, at the bottom of 42, he says this. Well, let's back up just a few sentences above. He says, they outlined the spiritual answer, which is step 2, and the program of action, which is steps 3 through 12, which 100 of them had followed successfully. There's our promise. Though I'd been a nominal churchman, their proposals were not too intellectually hard to swallow, but the program of action, there again, we're talking about 3 through 12, mainly 4 through 9. Though entirely sensible, was pretty drastic. It meant I would have to throw several lifelong conceptions out the window. That was not easy, but the moment I made up my mind to go through with the process, I had the curious feeling my alcoholic, sexaholic, whatever it may be, condition was relieved. In fact, it proved to be. But look at this. Quite as important was the discovery that spiritual principles would solve all my problems, not just a few, not just one addiction, all addictions. So you're definitely in the right place. Keep coming back. Some people will tell you, well, this book and this meeting's for this. My suggestion to that is find a new meeting. This is all addictions. Thanks.
And David, what I wanted to ask you is, so, this is speaking to the family and the wives of the alcoholic, sex addict, et cetera. Like, what's the role, of the family and of a recovered alcoholic or addict when we are dealing with someone that you spoke of tonight that falls under the category of that hopeless variety that you read about on in chapter 5, how it works. They just cannot or will not completely give themselves to this program. They're kind of beyond hope, constitutionally incapable of being honest with themselves. How do you deal with that person as a family or as someone that's recovered?
For that awesome question. I always like to go back to the book for any answer. That way it doesn't come out of my head from self. But my experience is this, page 83. If you want to take just a minute to gander over to there. Yes, there is a long period of reconstruction ahead, and we must take the lead. Now, obviously, if that person is drunk in this and this, I'm going to look at it from me saying my wife was that way. God forbid. I must take the lead. Remorseful mumbling that I'm sorry won't fit the bill at all. We are to sit down with the family, frankly, analyze the past. Now, I know this is talking about the person who is drunk, but at the same time, this is how I'm going to deal with it. This is what I'm going to pick out of this. I'm going to be very careful not to criticize them. That's a very, very strong principle right there. Their defects may be glaring, and they will be, because like you said, they're going to be hopeless and powerless. Chances are that our own actions has been partly responsible. Keyword, partly, not completely, but partly. So here's what I'm going to do if I'm that family member. I'm going to clean house with the family as best I can. I'm going to clean up my end of it. But I'm going to go into a prayer, a meditation, and a vision. And this is going to be one of 12, starting right here on this page. Asking, there's the prayer. Each morning in meditation that our Creator show us, there's the vision. And the meditation would be the way of patience, kindliness, tolerance, and love. And for me, if I was talking to someone whose wife was going through what you described, this is absolutely where I would take them to and begin to show them, hey, the spiritual life is not a theory. We have to live it. You hear that all the time. Work it, work it, work it. You're worth it. You're worth it. You're worth it. That's all good. That's all well. But beginning to live it. So, but there again, you know, unless one's family expresses a desire to live upon it, we think we need not urge them to do so. And so those are some of the instructions of many that are in this book, but that's where I would definitely begin with something like that. So thanks, Jeff.
David, I was wondering, do you have any experience or advice on people you're working with that are slacking, whether in writing or meetings?
Yes, ma'am. I have about 30 years of experience with that almost. So I think one of the things, I know one of the things that I do is, you know, I talk with them first. And, you know, we have that discussion. Some of these guys on here could probably answer that question better than I could for you that I've sponsored, but I just don't really tolerate that too much at all. And here's the reason why. Let's go to page 90 real quick. I hate to keep jumping you guys around the book here, but give you just a second to find your place there. When you discover a prospect for Alcoholics Anonymous, find out all you can about him. Now, we know this is the interview process, right? If he does not want to stop drinking, well, I'm going to turn that around and says if he does not want to recover, or if he's just going to half-ass, then I'm not going to waste time trying to persuade him. That is not my job. Either you want to still or you don't. And if you don't, it's better to find out sooner than later. And I don't, you know, I've come so far with that. I don't act stupid and crazy anymore, throw out all these crazy threats and stuff. It's just like, here it is, dude. You know, either we do it or we don't. If not, then you're going to have to go do it. You can do whatever you want. You just can't do it with me. And that's kind of the attitude that I've always had with the best. So my suggestion to you, if you have someone like that, I'd firm up on that deal pretty quick and stick to it.